I have resided in this dwelling for 43 years, a duration long enough to recall every creak in the floorboards and the particular way the sunshine shifts across the decorative paper as the afternoon transitions into twilight. This house used to be a hub of activity and sound. The piano in the front parlor was perpetually ready, its keys marked by little, inquisitive fingers. My children would gather around as Amos gently played soothing songs, and I would feign annoyance for how closely they surrounded him. Those times slipped by more swiftly than I understood. Now, most mornings, I wake up before the sun to organize the cooking area, polish the aged brass fixtures, and give water to the rosemary that Amos planted alongside the rear barrier. Occasionally, I find myself anticipating his voice, the soft, low tone of a melody he never finished. But the silence invariably reminds me of the truth. Recently, the quiet has become more profound. My offspring, Stellan and Marble, have been coming over more frequently, though never together. Their visits are consistently brief and polite, leaving a cold feeling in their wake. They claim it is to ensure I am well, to inquire if I require anything, yet their eyes constantly wander. Their gaze settles on the framed photos, the small drawer by the storage unit, and the secured cabinet where I store my important papers. Last Tuesday, Stellan leaned against the kitchen preparation surface, swirling the remaining coffee, and asked in that excessively relaxed tone if I had spoken with anyone about my last wishes. He attempted to mitigate the question with a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. Bet. Marble visited 2 days later, bringing a basket of baked goods she had not prepared herself. She patted my hand as if I were a difficult child and whispered about how much easier life would be if they assisted in handling my affairs. I nodded because it was simpler than arguing with her, but internally, a small spark of opposition ignited. I have managed my own life for a longer time than either of them has been alive. That evening, after the house settled down once more, I secured the sleeping chamber door and counted the files in the vault, just to confirm that nothing had been taken without my awareness. On the morning of my 68th birthday, I awoke before the sun ascended above the horizon and remained seated at the kitchen table for an extended period, listening to the house's stillness. I carefully arranged my mother's delicate teacups, folded the cloth serviettes, and prepared a lemon butter cake, despite the fact that I suspected no one would arrive to share it. Nevertheless, I felt the need to believe that perhaps this year would be different. By the late morning, I had transported the pastry to the dining room and set out 3 places. The tapers wavered in the slight air current, serving as a reminder of how effortlessly even a consistent flame can be extinguished. I kept glancing at the timepiece, each hour feeling longer than the previous one. It was approaching 4 time when Lyra finally showed up, her hair still secured with her academic ribbon, her book bag hanging low from one shoulder. She didn't look up from her device as she entered. I attempted to soothe the pain in my chest, reminding myself that at least she had come. "My mother is working until late," she stated, sliding her thumb across the screen. Uncle Stellan had a specific appointment. I pressed a piece of the dessert into her palm, center palm. She accepted it without tasting it, her eyes never lifting. I poured tea for the 2 of us and inquired about her studies. After a moment, she put her device down and looked at me, her expression a mixture of curiosity and something else I was reluctant to name. "Grandma," she began, her voice barely audible. "Do you have a significant amount of money in your bank accounts?" I tried to keep my face unchanged, but I could feel a cold surprise immobilizing me in the chair. "Why would you pose that question?" I managed to ask. She shrugged again, looking ashamed. "My mom mentioned, never mind." After she departed, the house seemed more empty than it had all day. New day. I returned the untouched cake to the kitchen, placed it gently on the counter, and rested my hand on the metal container of crucial documents. My fingers trembled as I traced the perimeter, wondering what else they were already arranging. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, listening to the old heating unit ticking and the outside air tapping against the glass. My thoughts kept returning to Lyra's inquiry, the way she could not quite look me in the eye. It settled painfully beneath my ribs. Sometime after 12 o'clock, I got up and put on my dressing gown. The house was completely silent, the kind of quiet that feels observant. I stood in the corridor, trying to recall when exactly I had ceased feeling protected with sinsane in these boundaries. I was about to go back to my room when I heard the slightest sound coming from the front entryway. Just the faint scraping noise of the drawer being opened. I held my breath. For a second, I thought I was imagining things, a trick of my worried mind, but then I noticed her small figure crouched by the cabinet, the weak illumination of her phone lighting her features. I said, my voice quiet but more stable than I felt. She was so startled she nearly dropped the device. When she lifted her head, her face was damp, and her mouth moved silently before words finally rushed out. I apologize, she whispered. I wasn't planning on taking anything. I had to check on you. I moved closer, feeling the coldness of the floor penetrating my body. What is the matter, dear? Her hands nervously twisted the edge of her jacket. They were talking, Mom and Uncle Stellan. After we ate, they mentioned that tomorrow at noon, they are going to take you to the financial institution. They said that if you became distressed, they would tell you it was for your benefit, that you would endorse the paperwork because you tend to be forgetful. I sank down onto the seat next to her, my heart beating so forcefully I worried it might obscure her words. They don't think you'd remember, she added, her voice cracking. But I overheard them. I thought you ought to know. I reached out and embraced her. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to shake. When I drew back, I smoothed her hair and felt a newfound lucidity settle within me, a quiet determination I had not experienced in years. After Lyra quietly left for the night, I remained seated for a long time in the quiet entrance hall, my hand resting on the drawer she had left slightly open, the darkness surrounding me, but I was no longer afraid of it. There was an almost comforting quality to the stillness, as though the very house was holding its breath along with me. When the clock announced midnight, I stood. My legs felt wobbly, but my thoughts were clear in a way they had not been for years. I traversed the living room to the piano and lowered myself onto the bench. My hands floated above the keys, recalling all the evenings Amos and I had sat here side by side, playing until the children fell asleep. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the seat cushion and reached into the empty space underneath it. My fingers made contact with the cold metal of the locked container. I had not accessed it since Amos had concealed it there, saying it was safer to keep certain items closed yet concealed. I pulled it out and positioned it on the piano's top. The key was still attached to my key ring. My hand was steady as I turned it. Inside were the papers I had always understood I would eventually require: banking statements, insurance forms, and the property deed. I shut the container and carried it to the kitchen table. At dawn, I prepared coffee and contacted Celine Chapin. The line rang 2 times before she answered. "Seraphine," she said, sounding surprised, "is everything all right?" "You need to update my will," I informed her. "And I want all my funds transferred into a special account that no one else can access." She paused, and for a moment I imagined she might object. But then she simply stated, "I can come by this afternoon." I thanked her and ended the call. The first morning light streamed across the floor, highlighting the arrangement of drooping birthday flowers on the surface. I gathered them carefully and carried them outside to the refuse bin, feeling a burden lift from my chest as I discarded them. It was just past noon when Stellan's vehicle arrived in the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as he got out, straightening his coat as though preparing for a formal event. Marble followed him, carrying a baked dish covered in a cloth, as if they were merely stopping by for a pleasant afternoon visit. I waited by the dining table, the locked container visibly displayed. When they knocked, I told them to enter. Stellan's smile was excessively cheerful as he stepped into the area. "Mom," he started, his voice overly sweet, "we thought it would be kind to bring you a midday meal." Maribel placed the food on the counter. Her attention briefly went to the lockbox before she quickly looked away. It's away. You have been in our thoughts, she mentioned. We simply want to ensure you're comfortable. I folded my hands together. I am perfectly comfortable. Stellan cleared his throat. Regarding the bank, Mom, we believed it would be best to handle everything today, just to be cautious. You know, with you not feeling completely healthy lately, Marble added softly, it truly is about safeguarding you, so you don't have to concern yourself with invoices or paperwork. I observed both of them. I recalled the youngsters they used to be. Stellan pleading for me to sing when the lightning scared him. Marble timid. Why asking me to arrange her hair? I questioned how those recollections could coexist with this current moment without dissolving. I appreciate your concern, I stated calmly, but I have already consulted with Celine. My finances are now in a trust. No one else will be handling them, so. The resulting silence stretched long enough for the kitchen clock to audibly tick 5 times. Stellan's mouth opened, then closed. Mom, he finally said, you don't need to complicate this more than necessary. I am not, I responded. Marble looked down at her hands. Stellan's jawline tightened. I reached for the lockbox and closed the top with a quiet snap, feeling an internal stability as I held their gaze. After their departure, I carried the baked dish to the counter and set it down without unwrapping it. Told her. My desire to eat had vanished the moment I saw the pity in Marble's eyes and the annoyance in Stellan's. I sat at the piano seat and rested my hands in my lap, sensing the quiet enclose me like a familiar blanket. I allowed my eyes to wander to the photograph on the mantelpiece, the one of Amos holding Lyra on the day she was born. He looked so proud, his eyes crinkling in that characteristic way whenever he felt utterly at peace. I pressed my palm to the picture frame and allowed my memories to flow from the edges of my consciousness. I thought about the first time he brought me to this residence, breathing. It was nothing but empty, dusty rooms and noisy floors back then, but he had led me from one area to the next, explaining what it would eventually become. You deserve something lovely, he had stated, his hand warm against my back, and you deserve to know it belongs to you. Yo, son. He had been the one to insist I maintain an account in my name only, money I could utilize if I ever needed to be independent. At the time, I had considered it a gesture I would never have to depend on. I had strongly believed that the children we raised would safeguard what we had built together. Yes, together. I traced the piano keys with my fingers, remembering the tune Amos used to hum when he thought I wasn't listening. It emerged in my thoughts as clear as a recording, and I let it fill the room. The tears then came, flowing down my cheeks in slow, continuous streams. But they did not drain me as I had anticipated. If anything, they caused something within me to solidify, a conviction that felt almost like liberation. When the final note faded, I got up and went back to the kitchen, where the locked container still rested on the surface. My hands were steady as I picked it up and carried it to the small safe located behind the storage shelving, putting it away where no one else would discover it. I did not retire for the evening. Instead, I prepared coffee and sat in the dark dining room. The kitchen light was switched off, so the windows reflected only my outline. I contemplated the way Stellan's voice had become strained with disappointment, the way Marble's hands had trembled as she adjusted her bag. The hours passed with the slow certainty of a rising tide. At some point, I must have entered a light sleep because the next thing I knew, the clock on the range showed 2:30 a.m. and the kitchen entrance quietly opened. I remained motionless. I kept my breathing regular, my eyes lowered just enough to see the silhouette move across the entryway. Yes. Stellan's figure became distinct in the weak light from the outdoor lamp behind him. He stood still for a moment, listening before fully stepping inside. He did not speak my name. He did not announce his presence. He went directly to the cupboard near the pantry, the one he must have persuaded himself held the locked container. My hand grasped Amos' walking stick, the smooth wood providing comfort against my palm. Stellan gently pulled the cupboard door open. I noticed his shoulders tense when he found nothing inside. He turned, examining the room. For a fraction of a second, I almost felt sorry for him, the desperation clinging to him like a second skin. Then I reached across the table and switched on the lamp. His head jerked up, his mouth dropping open. "Searching for something?" I asked. My voice was composed, as if we were discussing the weather. He swallowed hard, a flush rising in his complexion. "Mom, I thought I heard a noise." I watched him completely still. At 2:30 in the morning, he attempted to smile, but it contorted into something fragile. "You understand how older properties are. Doors don't always remain closed." I did not reply. I only repositioned the cane across my lap and allowed the silence to intensify between us. In that moment, I could clearly see how fearful he was that I might no longer be as easily controlled as he had hoped. Stellan stood frozen, one hand still resting on the vacant cupboard door. I could see the scheming flicker in his eyes as he weighed whether to continue his pretense. His mouth opened, but no word came out. I lifted my phone from the table and turned the screen towards him. The duration of the call glowed brightly and was undeniable. "Celine is listening," I stated, my voice so steady it surprised even myself. I thought it best to have someone hear this conversation. He winced as if I had struck him. "Mom, you misunderstand." "No," I interrupted. "You misunderstand. This residence is mine. That money belongs to me, and you will never enter here again without an invitation." His jaw tightened. "You're overreacting," he declared, but the fight had already gone out of him. I was only attempting to be helpful. "Help." I let the word linger between us. Entering my kitchen in the middle of the night, opening my cabinets. That is not assistance. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, looking for some justification he couldn't find. "I don't wish for things to be unpleasant," he finally said, his voice quiet. "Then you should have considered that before you began plotting behind my back." He swallowed again, his neck muscles moving. I wondered if he remembered the first time I applied a bandage to his scraped knee or the evenings he wept after his father left and how I had held him until he slept. I wondered if any of it was still important. I released a breath that felt like I had been holding for years. "You must depart now," I said softly. "And do not come back without contacting me first." He hesitated, his shoulders drooping, then turned and exited. The door closed behind him with a quiet sound that felt too final to be reversed. I stayed at the table until his car lights vanished from the driveway. My hands were steady as I turned off the lamp and carried my phone to the front corridor, where I placed it gently on the side table next to Amos' framed picture. The days following Stellan's departure passed in a silence so profound it felt as though the house itself was waiting. I tidied the kitchen each morning, made my coffee, and watered Amos rosemary near the back barrier. The habits provided me with stability, steady as a timekeeper. Some afternoons I involuntarily listened for footsteps on the porch, partly hoping and partly dreading they might reappear to make their appeal. The quiet persisted. And I started to realize it was permanent. I believe a part of me had always known this moment was inevitable, hidden within the gaps between all their careful inquiries and overly pleasant smiles. It was Lyra who eventually disrupted the stillness. One Thursday after classes, she approached the path alone, her bag slipping from one shoulder. I opened the door before she could knock. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and uncertain, and for a second she resembled the little girl who used to climb onto my lap with a storybook and ask me to read until she fell asleep. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice shaky. I didn't know they would actually proceed with it. I reached for her hand, surprised by how small it felt in mine. "Nah, Derek, you were courageous to inform me," I said, and truly meant it. She nodded, blinking quickly. "Mom says you're angry, that you don't want to see them anymore." I did not reply immediately. The words felt too heavy to utter. Instead, I guided her into the kitchen and poured her a glass of milk, just as I used to when she was young. She sipped it silently while I placed a dish of butter cookies between us. When she finally looked up again, there was a more focused quality in her expression, as if she was attempting to comprehend why everything had shifted. I rested my palm on the table, feeling the familiar wood warm beneath my skin, and inhaled quietly. Spring arrived early that year on the shore. One morning, I woke to find the hyacinths blossoming along the walkway, light blue and violet against the moist earth. I stood by the window with my coffee, feeling a relief in my chest that I had not believed possible. After so many years of giving away everything I possessed, it astonished me to find out how much remained. When I finally stopped offering parts of myself to people who only assessed my value by what I could hand over, I started to fill my days with minor pursuits that were unconnected to them. I became a part of the piano group at the local library, where I encountered neighbors who knew nothing about my children or my finances. On Wednesday mornings, I instructed a few novices on how to locate middle C and feel the weight of the keys under their fingers. Their inquiries were straightforward, sincere, and free from demands. In the afternoons, I tended the flower beds that Amos and I had planted when the children were small. I removed the extra growth, encouraged the new sprouts, and felt my shoulders lighten each time I worked the soil. One evening, Lyra visited once more, this time bringing a paper sack of sweet rolls she had saved from her meal. She hesitated in the entrance until I motioned for her to come in. She watched me pour tea, her expression cautious. "Grandma," she said after a lengthy silence, "you appear different." I put the teapot down and turned to face her. "In what way? You look as though you're content," she whispered. I touched her face with my thumb, brushing away a small piece of food. "I believe I am," I stated. It surprised me how genuine the feeling was. I had assumed the best phases of my life were finished, that all I had left was to tolerate whatever they decided I should be. But standing there in my own cooking area, I realized I had selected a different path. I had chosen to belong to myself.